Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, brought to you by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.
Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. This is a sad day. We're here to celebrate the dead pool, the products that have been deceased and products that are in hospice right now that are going to be deceased soon. It's products nearing the end of support.
And Randy, you think about it, and we have, if we're looking at all of this, we all benefited from those that went before us. And, given that we're hopefully releasing this around Memorial Day, we have so many people they're Gold Star families who had a family member that made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. But let's remind ourselves that these software products and the people that gave their lives to these products to work 80 hours a week to make them work, these people made those sacrifices for our firms. And so we need to recognize those, we need to recognize that it's not nearly as much of a sacrifice as those Gold Star families or even the Blue Star families make, but it is a sacrifice and it does need to be acknowledged. So I'll turn it over to you now.
Well, actually, let's have a moment of silence for all these departed products. If you're an audio listener, we'll talk about them in a moment.
Amen.
So that said, there were a lot of great products historically. In fact, I presented in Nashville just the day before we're recording this. And one of the attendees said, "You may not remember ATB." And I said, "Oh, ATB for sure. Steve Blundell, miss him dearly." So there's a lot of people that created products that were really great people. And so things like, and I am going to read them from the slide just for the audio listeners, but Creative Solutions Accounting, Peachtree for DOS, which, by the way, I deployed in 1981 on an IBM PC, QuickBooks Pro and Premier, ProSystem FX Document on-premise is now gone. The old Thomson Reuters CBS client bookkeeping system. What an interesting way to handle remote bookkeeping. And of course, personal accounting with Quicken, which actually is kind of still available, but no longer an Intuit. And of course, Mint went, away. Great Plains, of course, the Doug Burgum company. And, you see Doug Burgum in the public eye now, but Great Plains acquired by
Microsoft. Went from the
Microsoft.
Great Plains to being the Secretary of Interior. Who saw that coming?
Well, he always wanted to be president, so that's probably his stepping stone because he's got his governor deal in. But Cougar Mountain Denali, SAP R3, boy, I did a lot of work on that. Of course, Pro Series Basic and Intuit's Lacert Tax Analyzer. And frankly, the whole advisory platform that Intuit built was really a good one. And I was just so sad to see that die. One that, we spent a lot of effort on, and it was interesting to see how it went, was Microsoft Office Accounting. Look, I think we're reading the tombstone right now. It was around from 2003 through 2009. It was just getting market share when Microsoft pulled the plug on it. They were actually effectively competing against QuickBooks. The inscription on the tombstone says, "Beloved brother of Clippy, son of Excel and Word. Being right and accurate isn't always enough." What an interesting epitaph, if you will, for that particular product. And the guy that was behind that, Bob Lewis, did a lot of work, and the product was really working beautifully. But yet DAC Easy Accounting, and of course Visual Practice Management, which was purchased by CCH and became the practice management product, but the Visual Client write-up. And, since we're talking about a holiday here with Memorial Day, my family goes to all of our local cemeteries and we put flags properly on the graves. Many people do not understand the respect for the flag now. We do, and we're quite adamant about doing things right. That probably comes from my sister being in the Navy. And, all of my uncles and father serving in World War II, but we get it. And in any case, When I think about visual practice management, so forth, the founder of that company's birthday is the 4th of July, which I always send him a message around that holiday. But QuickBooks Point of Sale going down, Microsoft Office 2003, which was such a solid version of the product, and of course XP Vista 7. And the great news, Brian, as we're thinking about those departed, we can look for the ones that are coming, because I noticed today that Microsoft is building a new version of Windows called K2, which is pretty interesting. They're after quality in their next version of Windows, and they named it K2. And of
Well,
course,
why wouldn't you name a quality product K2?
I think it's hilarious. Obviously, many of you know that I'm the owner of K2 Enterprises, and that's how Brian and I met, was through our K2 CPE courses. But watch for Windows K2, the new quality version of Windows. And that was just announced the day before we recorded this. But, Brian came up with an idea some time ago called the Deadpool. And really, these are products that are in software hospice, if you will. The vendors have announced that they're going to kill the products, and we need to be thoughtful about that. And, I actually sent a message to all of my team members about Microsoft Publisher, whose death date is projected to be October 13th of 2026. In my mind, when I see these, it's unfortunately like going to the oncologist and saying, you got 6 months to live. But in this particular case, it's not a variable date. It is a pure drop dead date. And, in this particular case, the Microsoft Publisher files will not be readable by the surviving products. You can convert them now, but Microsoft says don't plan on being able to convert them after the dead date. Somebody will come up with a way, I suspect. But, just from an operational perspective, you've got to start thinking about how you get this changed. So, Brian, you might speak to some of the other products in the list.
Sure. So believe it or not, Office 2021 end of support is in October. So if you bought the on-premises version of it, there will be no security updates after October, which is, based on some of the previous podcasts we've done, is a pretty big deal. I was actually working on some workstations for a small business that I do some work with, and they had somebody that was on 24H2, Windows 11 24H2, and that ends in October. Windows 11 Enterprise and Education 23H2 ends in November of this year. Windows 10 Home Extended Support ends October 13th, 2026 with no extension. Windows Pro and Enterprise Business Support is available into the second, even a second and a third year, starting in October, but it'll be 122 per seat in year two and 244 a seat in year three. And again, it will be Elvis dead on October the 14th of 2028.
And that's hard to believe. That's only 2.5 years out, friends. So for those of you that said, "Oh, I'll just stay on Windows 10 and be a real strong person," it's like, yeah, no, that's not the way
And,
it's
and
going to
you're gonna
work.
and you're gonna be $400 lighter in the wallet for Windows. I mean, I feel like that's, wouldn't you be better off just buying a whole new computer?
Yeah.
You know, it that Dynamics 365 Business Central on premises is going to 2024 release wave 2 is out as of now, and the .NET 9, as we're record as at the time, by the time this is released, .NET 9 will also have crossed the rainbow bridge into the next world.
Well, now you might stay with us, friends, because you might be saying, well, what's your point, guys? And the point is coming up because there are products that are broadly used in the profession. An example here is File Cabinet CS from Thomson Reuters, which has an official end of life of December 31 of 2027. And the day before we recorded this, I was asked by a managing partner who said, "Hey, I'm on File Cabinet CS. What's my alternatives?" So I had that question in a live group of managing partners just yesterday. And that firm was not the only firm on this product. So, Brian, what can you tell our listeners about File Cabinet CS?
Well, there's 12,000 firms on this platform, so it's a tool that is very popular. It has been very successful in the market. However, there are some issues with it. So much of the software that we work with today is stuff that was written pre Y2K, and this is no exception. And the problem with that is that we didn't store data in the way we then in the format that we need that we store it now. Okay. And so the problem is now that the tools, with 12,000 firms on the platform, the tools are not, they're probably not going to spend a whole lot of money writing a lot of tools to do this. And this is a very laborious process for some reasons that we'll talk about here in a second. One consultant estimated that 500 client manual export, 4 to 8 weeks of staff time, $8 to $15,000 in loaded labor. Part of the problem is that the files are broken up to individual pages, and so you have to basically assemble the images of each of the pages into a PDF file or some other format. So it's a restructuring of data problem in there, and there's not really a great tool for that. Again, IT consultants are going to charge $10 to $50,000 for this. Now, again, this export does require restructuring files. The files are stored one page at a time as images, and it's data stored, and they have to be recombined. And there's, of course, the number of pages is variable, and this is not a simple process. Now, you can go in and open up each individual file, export it to PDF, and then reload it. But then you've also got to gather all that indexing data that you have that's used to file this in here. And I've got a couple of blog posts that were written by Chris at Liscio. Chris Farrell, who actually is their founder and CEO. He actually has spent quite a bit of time converting stuff out of here. There's also a guy named Kevin Anderson that's a CPA out of Utah that has done this, but it is an inexact process. And the problem with this is that, if you start thinking about layering, I may need to take 5 weeks of staff time or something like that to make this conversion. You're running out of daylight, is what we would say in the farming world. I have bees, and I didn't get my mite treatments done last fall. And there are a lot of reasons I didn't get them done. I'm not making any excuses, but we had a lot of calamity last fall, and I didn't get my mite treatments done. And I lost half my bee colonies this winter, okay, because I didn't get out and do the chores that I should have done. Now, the lesson for you is that the thing here is that there isn't as much time as you think before 12/31/2027. You have remaining in 2026, second busy season, and then you have, October 15th and September 15th, and then you have first busy season next year, and you have second busy season next year. And notice how compressed the spots are in between. And so I want you to start thinking about that now. If you're on that product, I would try to get something I would try to get something selected and at least piloted this year so that next year you can go at it really hard. Honestly, I'd like to see you do that conversion maybe before the end of the year, okay? Because the problem you're going to have is that the talent to do the conversion is you're going to have to throw lots and lots of staff hours at it if you don't have an automation. If you do have an automation, it's going to cost big money, and you don't have a whole lot of margin for error there. And you're talking about really your entire library of working papers, which is your practice. And so this is not an asset that you want to gamble with.
So, we're talking about file cabinet CS, but in my mind, this represents a much bigger picture because there are many products that you use where you really need to do a migration. And the timeframes that you have to do it when you see an end of life date is as compressed as Brian is laying out. If you're in public practice, you've really only got a few flexible months in any given year. And if you have a culture of tax extensions where you used to have downtime in the summer, you no longer have that. So you may have very little time available. So that's kind of point one. Point two, Thomson Reuters, of course, would like to have you convert file cabinet CS into Go File Room. But I believe that Thomson is likely to be constrained in the resources. Now, I'm not speaking for Thomson. I don't know that in fact. I'm just saying if you got 12,000 firms and you're trying to move them, even with the utility, that's just a group of work. So kind of be thoughtful about how that all plays out. And in a separate accounting technology lab, We're discussing new generation document management products, which we certainly would like you to listen in on that if you're faced with a document conversion issue. Now, all of that said, note there's a few other interesting facts that we can talk about here. And we have been watching vendors create utilities to try to do some of this work. So, Brian, sorry to step in, but I'll hit it back to you for a moment.
Well, I mean, there are people that are coming up with ways to do this. One thing that Chris and Licio are doing is they have tool sets that will identify document classifications, will automatically classify and automatically name documents. There are tools like Paperless Plus out there that will index things. I actually installed a photo application just the other day in a container that did facial recognition on all of my legacy photos, and it was running on premises, and it actually did a remarkably good job. And so, the tools are getting better, but the problem again is that you don't know what you don't know about the data structures and the files in these things. And I wanted to call this to you here because this is an IED that can blow up your entire, this can blow up your season next year if you don't address it sooner rather than later. We need to go out and scout and find out what the issues are and what the conversion issues are if you have one of these legacy products, because you might be walking into something like this where you have to completely restructure literally every document that's in your client files that you want to retain in the new format. Now, again, I'll tell you that again, if you think about Randy's absolutely right about the amount of time you have. My normal rules when I was an accounting firm tech manager back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, one of the things I would always do is I was locked down from about December the 15th to April the 20th. Okay. And nothing major could happen during that 4-month period. Okay. And then we locked down again about, about August 15th until October 15th. Okay. And so you're literally knocking out 6 months of the year there. Okay. And then in those 6 months, you also have to do any summer audits that you have to do. You have to do your CPE, you have to do your vacations, you have staff turnover, and you have to train new employees. And so what I'm telling you here is, to use one of Randy's favorite statements from the farm, folks, you're burning daylight if you're not looking at this right now. It's time to address this, and you need to address it sooner rather than later, because this is one of the major assets of your practice is your working papers.
So that said, friends, you can see that we've got a lot of work ahead of us. These conversion tools will help us, but I'm going to caution you on one other key item. The cost of using AI to do these conversions is high if you use the general models. And many are going to try to use ChatGPT or Claude or whatever to get that job done. And number one, they don't have the best document recognition. And number two, they're quite expensive to do the job on a per page or per token basis. So we're going to try to identify tools that will help you with these types of conversions. We suspect many of you will wind up in Teams and SharePoint or in other platforms. Again, we have another lab on new generation document management. We'd invite you there. But we wanted to remember those that had gone before us because we have learned from many and stood on the shoulders of giants. You have a good day.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We'll be back next Saturday with a new episode of The Technology Lab from CPA Practice Advisor. Have a great week.